Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was one of the few games that launched with the Nintendo Switch in 2017 and introduced Nintendo's new generation of gaming. Nintendo had to change the formula of how players interact with the story to distinguish itself from past iterations of the Legend of Zelda games. Most of the older generations of Zelda games all follow the same overall pattern. You straightforwardly go through Link's adventure. You play the story from start to finish. Nintendo changed this to innovate their IP for newer generations. Today we'll be comparing the choices in narrative that Nintendo made in one of their older iterations, The Legend of Zelda The Windwaker, a personal favorite of mine, and the latest rendition, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. In Wind Waker, you're on a linear adventure. One significant story event leads to another until you eventually get to the end of the game. Without exploiting the game, there is no way around this. No matter how many times you play the game, you'll still be playing the same adventure. Wind Waker takes a basic linear narrative approach. A basic linear narrative gives you a story from start to finish. It takes you from point A to point B to point C, and so on. Breath of the Wild does this a bit differently. Your path isn't linear, instead you're on an open world adventure. You have complete control of the course of the story. From the very beginning, you aren't given any specific route on how to progress. If you choose, you can go through the main story as you see fit, fighting all 4 bosses before getting to the final boss, or you can go straight to Ganondorf, the final boss, and fight him right away. Although you still have the same ending no matter how you get there, you get to choose your own adventure. This type of narrative style, the adventure narrative, allows the player to play the game at their own pace. The adventure narrative is more focused on the journey rather than the destination. Unlike the basic linear narrative, with an adventure narrative style, you can go from point A to point C, to point B to point D. There's no wrong way to go about this adventure. In this visual, you can see just a couple of different routes that you can take to get to Ganondorf in Breath of the Wild. If we go back and compare the 2 different narrative styles in these 2 games, Wind Waker only has 1 route. With a bit of math, we can determine how many routes Breath of the Wild has in total. Knowing there are 5 main events one can go through, the 4 Divine Beasts and Ganondorf, we can use 5 factorial to get our total number. There is a total of 120 routes that you can take in Breath of the Wild. Comparing that to the singular route that you can take in Wind Waker shows you how much complexity is involved in the adventure-style narrative. With an adventure-style narrative, players get an immense sense of agency due to the amount of control left by the player. The adventure-style narrative also gives the players replayability value. Since there are many different routes to choose from, you can try out previous routes that you haven't already played. Each different route will have its own set of challenges separate from the others for you to overcome. Although creating an adventure-style narrative can be a much more daunting task than making a basic linear narrative in video games, players like myself hold a lot of appreciation for the extensive stories and go back to those type of games countless of times.